Imagine a nightmare where the backbone of a nation simply snaps in half. That is essentially what is playing out right now for Putin. The sort of intense worker anger that once tore down the Soviet, it has been reawakened, and it is louder than ever. As of February 2026, the Russian railways have effectively collapsed. We are talking about a massive system worth billions of dollars that is just gone. Hundreds of thousands of workers are being ruthlessly thrown onto the street. It is brutal. Companies are literally provoking massive crowds by firing people without a cent of compensation. Miners and railway workers are now fighting actual hunger with a level of savagery we have not seen in decades. This is not just a protest. This massive wave of rebellion is violently shaking the regime to its very foundation. Even the streets of Moscow are rapidly descending into uncontrollable chaos. And here is the strategic nightmare for them. Critical supply lines to the front are now blocked. February 16, 2026 goes down in history as the day Moscow's long-standing myth of economic resilience suffered a severe, maybe fatal, blow. The government tried to invoke emergency protocols to save the railways, but between the war economy and Ukraine's deep attack, it was mission impossible. The numbers are staggering. This institution is burdened by a massive debt of 4 trillion rubles. It has announced its first net loss since the pandemic, and it is effectively experiencing a total collapse. They are cutting expenditures on wagon and locomotive purchases significantly. Budgets for railway construction and infrastructure repair frozen. But let's be real, the first victims of this financial bankruptcy were the people. Starting back in October, the company began sending experienced staff on unpaid leave en masse and carrying out large-scale layoffs. We have information that this organization has not paid advances or salaries for 2 months. They won't even purchase tickets for workers to depart from the work site. It is a trap. According to reports, a wave of non-hysterical layoffs has begun across Russia. Think about this statistic. 1 in 4 companies in Russia is reducing its workforce right now, and these layoffs are generally happening without any legal compensation. The operational and financial stagnation of ARZD is fundamentally shaking the economic and military civilization envisioned across Russia. You have to understand, this massive institution is not just an ordinary freight company. It has over 700,000 employees. It is a huge organization representing the state's social security network for a large segment of the country. When you start laying people off and forcing unpaid leave, it directly affects tens of thousands of families. The secondary effects create an even more severe wave. Hundreds of thousands of workers who have loyally served the state for years found themselves overnight in the midst of deep poverty and uncertainty. And this is happening in an economic climate where interest rates have skyrocketed. It is a perfect storm. You look at the situation and you realize the only thing really awaiting these migrating masses is a deep, dark spiral of unemployment. It is terrifying when state-owned companies cannot pay their debts to suppliers, when a giant like ARZD goes bankrupt, and when tens of thousands of businesses report trillions of rubles in losses. You know, this has evolved far beyond a simple economic crisis. This is now an existential threat to the regime itself. Think about the hundreds of thousands of ARZD workers. These are the people bearing the burden of the war. Their purchasing power is eroding. They are not getting their salaries, and ultimately, they are being laid off. Alongside the miners, these workers carry the potential spark of a new wave of civil disobedience. This massive group controls the country's production and logistics arteries. If you abandon them to hunger and uncertainty, you are brutally tearing up the implicit social contract that keeps the state standing. For years, the deal was simple between the government and the people. We provide minimal economic security, and you do not interfere in the political arena. But the collapse of ARZD destroyed this equation. If these workers decide to strike, block the tracks, or simply refuse to go to work, it disrupts military logistics and severs the connection between the vast geography of Russia and the capital. This is not just a protest action. It is a mutiny threat aimed directly at the heart of the regime. And do you want to know how much the administration fears this? The answer is hidden in the incredible measures they are taking. According to leaked intelligence report, ARZD, despite being on the verge of bankruptcy, is arming more than 30,000 security personnel within its ranks with heavy weapons on orders from the Kremlin. It is insane. A company that is cutting its investment budget and sending staff on unpaid leave is transforming thousands of people into a paramilitary force. This is not a measure taken against an external enemy. It is directly against its own angry workers and the starving public. They are anticipating that workers who lost their jobs and futures will occupy stations, so these armed units are positioned as instruments of violence. It is a government labeling its own people as a potential existential threat, prepared to resolve issues with the barrel of a gun. To really understand the danger here, look at Russia's recent political history. Back in the late 1980s, the force that fundamentally undermined the Soviet Union wasn't an external military coup. It was the anger of the working class within. When hundreds of thousands of mining and heavy industry workers in the Donbass, Kuzbas, and Vorkuta regions went on strike due to deteriorating living conditions, unpaid wages, and food shortages, the wheels of state production ground to a halt. These people were seen as the regime's loyal supporters, gracing propaganda posters, but when they poured onto the street, they destroyed the legitimacy of the central authority. It wasn't just an economic demand, it was a civil declaration of the system's bankruptcy. Today, the Kremlin faces this ominous repetition of history. They have embarked on an irreversible path toward political collapse. And parallel to this spiral of impoverishment in the civilian world, the logistical infrastructure of the war on the ground is also being crippled by the collapse of ARZD. Here is the thing. Russian military doctrine relies entirely on railways. We are talking about the transport of vast quantities of armored vehicles, tanks, ammunition, and personnel. However, this is where a critical vulnerability comes into play. A large part of Russia's vast railway network runs on electric locomotives rather than diesel engines. This system depends on the country's power transmission lines and power plant. It is at great risk due to the asymmetric nature of the conflicts behind the front line. The empire's iron arteries were severed. Today, trains in Siberia are not moving. Ammunition from North Korea is not reaching the front line. The Kremlin had laughed at the West's restrictions, thinking they were invincible. But irony has a way of catching up with you. The world's largest war machine is currently being stopped by a simple $10 metal part. You know things are getting desperate when you have to start dismantling your own working machines just to keep a few others moving. It is a process called cannibalization, and it is happening right now on a massive scale. This method involves taking apart operational sound wagon and using those parts to maintain the system by installing them on other wagons. Current reports for 2025 reveal the scale of this destruction, and the statistics are alarming. Approximately 50,000 of Russia's most strategic asset, the innovative car fleet, is currently being used for parts. We are talking about a massive portion, between 15% and 20% of their total capacity, just being stripped down. But here is the trap. This temporary solution triggers a massive technical disaster. In engineering, there is a concept called metal fatigue, and it is the most deadly link in this cycle. Think about it. When you remove a bearing or an axle system that has already traveled thousands of kilometers, its structural integrity is compromised. If you mount that worn-out part onto another wagon, you are reducing that part's load capacity and durability to a level you just cannot predict. Open source data and technical analyses clearly show that the use of such cannibalized parts increases the risk of derailment and catastrophic accidents by 300%. That is a terrifying number. Just imagine a small, worn-out metal part cracking on the wheel of a train carrying 60-ton T-90 tank or explosive ammunition in the freezing cold of Siberia. At that moment, it is not just a train accident. The logistics line to the front turns into a disaster that will shut down for weeks. These issues also directly impact ARZD's loading capacity. According to leaked reports and industry analyses, 93% of the current decline in loading in Russia is directly attributable to locomotive shortages. And as if this internal decay wasn't enough, it is being accompanied by asymmetric attacks from the outside targeting the nervous system. Ukrainian intelligence and partisan cells within Russia have figured out that they do not need to derail massive trains to stop them. They have chosen a much cheaper, much smarter target: relay cabinet. You have probably seen these gray metal boxes standing right next to track. They are the electronic brains of signaling switches and traffic flow. All it takes is a partisan opening one of these boxes with a crowbar, using $5 worth of gasoline, and setting it on fire. The moment it burns, all traffic lights in that railway block automatically switch to fail-safe mode. According to data verified by Pi News, more than 145 such acts of sabotage and arson have occurred across Russia and along its European border. When these cabinets burn, the system effectively goes blind. Trains must stop. Passage is only possible in manual mode via radio command, moving at a snail's pace of 10 kilometers per hour. Military logistics, which should flow at 80 kilometers per hour, suddenly comes to a standstill. A queue of hundreds of trains forms behind. Without firing a single bullet, the partisans manage to reduce the Russian army's supply speed by 80% with just a lighter. When you combine power outages, part shortages, and broken locomotives, the massive railway network turns into a giant bottleneck. Add in the sabotage against critical points like the Severodvinski Tunnel, and the logistics system is literally caught in a strangulation loop. Military supplies cannot advance, and industrial products cannot reach the market. This massive infarction on the railways is ruthlessly destroying the Kremlin's biggest geopolitical plan B. Remember, completely cut off from Western markets. With the start of the war, Vladimir Putin had bet all his chips on the return to the East strategy. The Balamore, or BAM, and Trans-Siberian railway lines extending to China were supposed to be the lifeline. But with the de facto bankruptcy of ARZD, this steel Silk Road to Asia has been completely shut down. The biggest and most deadly wave here is hitting the Kuzbass region. This is the heart of Russia's heavy industry and energy export. This massive mining basin is the center of the country's coal and metallurgical production, and it is completely dependent on railways to deliver its black gold to Asian ports. But today, millions of tons of coal are piling up in Siberia's freezing storage facilities because thousands of kilometers of tracks are clogged with broken locomotives and shattered wagons. Unplanned increases in cargo transportation costs have completely eroded the profit margin. It is simple economics. When the cost of shipping goods to the Chinese border exceeds the value of the goods themselves, the system automatically enters collapse mode. With the coal they produce unable to be transported, massive mining operations are shutting down one after another.